Welcome to the Honest Reflection Podcast with your hosts, Cody Hairston and Nick Woods. Here, we want to help you reflect on your week and be honest about your relationship with God. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hey guys, we're glad to have you listening into another episode this week. As usual, if you like what you hear, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. Nick, how's it going this week?
Good. It's been a good week getting ready for the kids getting ready for Halloween and fall stuff because we got the stuff at the school where they had a pumpkin contest and all that kind of stuff going on. So it's like a busier time for this week. So it's been good stuff. How about you? How's your week?
It's going pretty good so far. It's rainy and cold here, so we're like directly into fall, but that's good. That just means it's a different season. We had to skip a week because we were having some technical difficulties last week, and I actually had to make kind of the executive decision to say, hey guys, we got to do something different for this week. So apologies for that, but we will be in Hebrews chapter 7 today. And as usual, I will go ahead and I'll read through the chapter, and then Nick will go ahead and kind of discuss from there. Hebrews chapter 6. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of God Most High, met Abraham and blessed him as he returned from defeating the kings, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, his name means king of righteousness, then also king of Salem meaning king of peace. Without father, mother, or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Now consider how great this man was. Even Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of plunder to him. The sons of Levi, who received the priestly office, have a command according to the law to collect a tenth from the people, that is, from their brothers and sisters, though they have also descended from Abraham. But one without this lineage collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed the one who had the promises. Without a doubt, the inferior is blessed by the superior. In the one case, men who will die receive a tenth, but in the other case, Scripture testifies that he lives. And in a sense, Levi himself, who receives a tenth, has paid a tenth through Abraham, for he was still within his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. Now, if perfection came through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest to appear, said to be according to the order of Melchizedek, and not according to the order of Aaron? For when there is a change of priesthood, there must be a change of law as well. For the one these things are spoken about belonged to a different tribe. No one from it has served at the altar. Now it is evident that our Lord came from Judah, and Moses said nothing about that tribe concerning priests. And this becomes clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, who did not become a priest based on legal regulation about physical descent, but based on the power of an indestructible life. For it has been testified, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So the previous command is annulled because it was weak and unprofitable, for the law perfected nothing. But a better hope is introduced, through which we draw near to God. None of this happened without an oath, for others became priests without an oath, but he became a priest with an oath made by the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Because of this oath, Jesus has also become the guarantee of a better covenant. Now many have become Levitical priests, since they are prevented by death from remaining in office. But because he remains forever, he holds his priesthood permanently. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, since he always lives to intercede for them. For this is the kind of high priest that we need: holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He doesn't need to offer sacrifices every day, as high priests do, first for their own sins, then for those of the people. He did this once for all time when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests men who are weak, but the promise of an oath, which came after the law, appoints a son who has been perfected forever. So Melchizedek receives a lot of attention here in this chapter, and really in the book as a whole. I'm glad that the Hebrews writer finally gets to talk about Melchizedek, because he had been kind of laying some breadcrumbs going all the way back to chapter 5. But since Melchizedek just gets so much face time here, I do think a good understanding of who he is will help us kind of better understand the points that the Hebrews writer is making here. So Nick, first, can you tell us a little about this Melchizedek person and kind of where he shows up in the Bible story?
Yeah, so aside from here in Hebrews, Melchizedek is only mentioned two other times in the Bible. It's in Genesis 14 and in Psalm 110. And Genesis 14 is where we're kind of introduced to like who he is and why he comes up. And this is the main reference that the Hebrew writer is talking about and introducing him. In Psalm 110, which is quoted in chapter 7, is David's reference to this role of high priest, and his kingship as well in that psalm, I believe. But who Melchizedek was he was a priest and king. So we're told that, and the Hebrew writer tells us that too. He's the king of Salem, priest of the Most High God. And Abraham comes to him after having gone to rescue Lot. So in Genesis 14, Lot's taken captive in this battle, and Abraham gathers some of his men. They go rescue Lot. They come back down, and on their way back, they come to Melchizedek. Abraham wants to offer a sacrifice to God for the victory, and they come to Melchizedek to do that as the priest of God. And this is where he enters into the Bible story. And just like the Hebrew writer mentions, he enters in and he leaves the story just as unassumingly. The Hebrew writer would say he's without father, mother, genealogy, having beginning of days or end of life. He just kind of appears for the purpose of Abraham to offer a sacrifice to God. And then the Bible doesn't talk about him again until David mentions him in Psalm 110. And then the Hebrew writer mentions him here. So we see that he's a king. And again, we're paralleling obviously this role to Jesus, and we are trying to understand how Jesus can be a high priest. And Jesus was not of the Levitical descent, and so how is this possible? Well, here's this man Melchizedek who was a priest of the Most High God, which is most important for our particular discussion. But it's significant then that the Hebrew writer would say he was the king of righteousness and also the king of peace, the king of Salem, and so he was the ruler of peace in the place of peace. And so this is who this man is in the Bible to us. And I think what we're being led to is the peace of Christ and the peacemaker that he is, bringing peace with God, which is what the high priest would do. So now he's the priest of God Most High, and the high priest would make peace with God on behalf of the people. And so now we have the King of Peace making peace with God on our behalf. And so you see the imagery, it goes really deep, and we'll dive a little bit more into that. But one of the other things that's pointed out in these first 3 verses, that this priest, he's ordained by God. He's not ordained by his genealogy or by being a Levite or a descendant of Aaron. He's chosen by God. And this is spoken of as greater, of course, than being ordained because you descended from the one Aaron who was ordained. And so we're laying groundwork. How is Jesus able to be a high priest? Well, God chose him, and that's greater than being a descendant of someone who God chose. If that logic is following in just in the kind of these first 3 verses here. And then, of course, like Jesus, in the priestly sense, there is no genealogy of Melchizedek. And so it's not necessary to follow that. We just know that he was chosen by God. And I think logically, that's what the Hebrew writer is trying to pull us to is there a precedent for God choosing a priest that's not a Levitical priesthood? Yes, here's Melchizedek. We don't even know who his parents were. So it doesn't matter that Jesus wasn't a descendant of Aaron or of the Levites. And I think that's what makes this interesting. And I think also as we kind of dive into this, we'll see the point is that there is a better way to access God than going through the Levitical priesthood. And so there's something better than what existed for the Jewish Christian or the Jew at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that he kind of lays all this out, where clearly his goal is going to be, the priesthood that Jesus is a part of is better than the Levitical one. And you've already kind of talked about that a little bit, but it's like first he has to connect Jesus to this Melchizedek priesthood, but even before that, he has to prove that this Melchizedek priesthood is even, valuable or better in any kind of sense. And that's really what the writer is doing kind of in the first 10 or so verses. Like the first thing he says is, okay, we know that Melchizedek's priesthood is going to be great because Melchizedek was great. In fact, he was greater than Abraham based on some of the stuff that you talked about back there in Genesis 14. And I imagine that would have been pretty jarring for these Jewish Christians to hear, like, wait a minute, somebody greater than Abraham. And he's like, well, let me lay out the case. Because back in Genesis 14, Abraham gave a tenth to Melchizedek. It's like, okay, well, the inferior pays the tenth to the superior. So if Abraham is paying the tithe to Melchizedek, well, that says something about the nature of their relationship. it speaks to how elevated Melchizedek was. And in fact, he even points out the Levites have been taking a tenth from the people, you know, as long as there have been Levites, and that was to show not that they Levites were necessarily better than their brothers and sisters, but they were better equipped to be those priests because they were from the right tribe. And so in the same kind of way, like Abraham giving this tithe to Melchizedek, it shows, wait a minute, he is better equipped for this role. And so he proves, okay, he's better than Abraham, but I think maybe the natural question after that is, okay, well, what does that have to do with the Levites? You know, what does that have to do with the Levitical priesthood? He's like, well, I got to answer for that too, because Abraham is Levite's great grandfather, right? And so if Abraham isn't as great as Melchizedek, then there's no way that Levi could be, and he is the originator of the priest, him and Aaron. And so he even points out it's almost as if Levi paid the tithe when Abraham did, because he was still within him. He was there in like a figurative sense. And so in some ways, that's also showing that Levi and his priesthood aren't as great as Melchizedek's either. And so it's very in-depth Bible study here. I don't know that you would gather all of that if you just read through Genesis 14, but you do have all of these like clear kind of things that come out of there that do show, okay, this Melchizedek, he was great. He was greater than Abraham. He was greater than Levi, who would then come after him. And so if he has a priesthood, okay, well, that priesthood is going to be something that we need to pay attention to. And as you pointed out, that's what David is talking about in Psalm 110. He says, hey, another priest is coming, and this priest is going to be different than the priest that we've already had. He's not going to be from like a Levite. He's not going to be a priest like the Levitical priest. He's going to be a priest like Melchizedek. And so that means that priest that's going to come later, well, he's going to be greater than anyone that could come from the line of Levi. And we know that one is going to be Jesus. And so, again, the Hebrews writer, as he's showing them all this in-depth Bible knowledge, it's not just to pat himself on the back and just show how much he knows. He's trying to make a point to show these people why they need to stick with Jesus, because he is this greater high priest. There's no need for them to go back to the Levitical priesthood, because there's something and there's someone better. And he continues in that argument moving forward. Nick, what's new and what's different about this Melchizedek priesthood that makes it a necessity and just preferable for these Jewish Christians?
Yeah, I was thinking, and I think the Hebrew writer gives us like maybe three different things, and maybe as you're listening and reading along, you think of some other things that he mentions here too. But he talks about the Levitical priesthood as though it was imperfect. So he says in verse 11, now if the perfection was through this priesthood, what further need was there of another priest to arise? And so the perfection there, I think, would be our relationship with God. If this priesthood perfectly brought us to God in a way that was unchangeable, then there wouldn't need to be another priesthood. And so, but that's not the case, because this was a descendant of Abraham. This was a person, and again, people who were sinful also had to have sacrifices offered on their behalf. So that's an imperfection. But then also, these priests as men were imperfect. Aaron showed that very early on. That there's going to be some imperfections with this process when Moses goes up to get the law, and then the people come to Aaron and say, Moses is gone, we need a God, and they build the golden calf at Aaron's permission. Like Aaron allows this, does this, and of course there's the craziness there of Aaron's like, I don't know how this happened, we threw gold in the fire and it just popped out. It's like imperfect people, right? Then you go further into the story and you have Eli and Samuel's sons who are serving as priests to the people, and they're wicked men. And so not only imperfect, but here are men who are serving as a go-between between God's people and him, who are wicked themselves. This shows merely just the imperfections of this priesthood, right? And in pulling this out, it's like, okay, there has to be something better. So this priesthood is imperfect. The next thing is this priesthood is finite. Right? It's finite to the priest that's serving at the time. And then the priesthood essentially begins, even though it's a consistent genealogy, It's destructible. It could be destroyed with the temple, with the end of the Levite genealogy. And that's kind of a point he makes here. He says, in verse 15, he says, there is still clear another priest arises according to the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become such not on the basis of law or physical requirement, i.e. the genealogy, but according to the power of an indestructible life, for it is written, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So here's something that's different and better. Like, let's follow Jesus as our priest because this priesthood is forever. This priesthood's not going to be changed and it can't be taken away. Jesus was raised from the dead and he lives. His priesthood is never going to change again. And so all of those things point to something better. And then he kind of ends with this picture again of hope that comes from the eternal concept. And so because there's eternal in verse 19, on the other hand, if there is a bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God. So there's the former commandment, it's weakness and useless, but on the other hand, there's hope because of something that helps us draw near to God. So here are these, and these are, again, there might be more that we see in the text, but there's three really good reasons why Jesus is a better high priest and his priesthood is going to be better and lasting and eternal. So this hope, Cody, how does Jesus bring this hope through this role of high priest?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is wrapped up in him like fulfilling the role better. Like you mentioned, or like the Psalm quote kind of highlights, he's a priest forever. And so because Jesus lives forever, he is able to continually perform this work of being that go-between between God and man and between man and God. And so obviously, if you have somebody who could do something for 30 days or 30 years versus somebody who could do something forever, well, the one who can do it forever is preferable. So you had the physical high priest, they were dying. And so, you end up with one high priest and the next and the next and the next. Jesus, there's no need for any of that because he can do it forever. And so for the remainder of time, he can be that go between you and God. And so there's a lot of hope in that. Also, Jesus was sinless. And so, he didn't have to just continually like offer these sacrifices again and again and again. In fact, in verse 27, he says, he doesn't need to offer sacrifices every day as high priests do, first for their own sins, right? So the old high priest, before they could even think about like going between the congregation and God, they had to get themselves right. And you can go back to Leviticus, you can see like all the different like washings and there's all the stuff they had to do to kind of prepare themselves to go in. It's like, well, Jesus was perfect. He was sinless. And so he doesn't have to go through that entire process. He can just constantly be there to advocate for you to the Father. And in fact, he was so perfect that in a way, Jesus was the sacrifice and the sacrificer. Like he sacrificed himself because that's how perfect he was. And so I think there's a lot of hope that's just wrapped up in the fact that, man, the one who's standing before God on my behalf, he's able to do this at a level that like nobody else ever could. But I also think that there's a lot of hope that's wrapped in this oath language that comes up in verse 22. So Jesus is the high priest because God promised he was going to bring in this high priest, not because he just happened to be born at a certain time from a certain tribe and he fulfilled some requirements, because that's how the old high priests got to their position. They just so happened to be Aaron's great whatever grandson, and they just happened to be the oldest son when the previous high priest died. Like it didn't really say anything about them. It's like, well, this time it actually says a lot about Jesus, and it says a lot about God who sent him. And so anybody who is serving in this role because God put him there is automatically going to be greater than whatever law could produce in any other sort of priest. And so Jesus is a representation of this oath that God gave really a long time ago to talk about how he was going to be able to save his people from sin. Jesus is a representation of all of the promises from the prophets of God saving his people and making this new people that are going to be able to honor him and live faithfully towards him. Jesus, he reminds us of all of that. And really, that's just better than anything a high priest from Judaism could ever bring. It's just it was not possible for them to bring that type of hope, and that's why the Hebrews writer is saying, "Don't go back, because you have this high priest." And he's going to continue to talk about this heavenly priesthood and the covenants that come from that in the next couple of chapters. But to round out today's episode, I just want to think about Jesus, because Jesus is our perfect high priest, and I want us to just dwell and reflect on that.
Yeah, and so as we kind of wrap up, I think that's it. That's the point, right? The Hebrew letter started this way, right? God has spoken to us in many different ways, in many different times, but now he speaks to us through his son, right? So listen to him, hear what he has to say, follow him. And that's kind of the point that we're working to in all this letter. So as we reflect today, how awesome is it that we can have the Son of God as our high priest forever? He's going to be fair, he's going to be just, and he's going to be the perfect go-between who allows us to draw near to God. So do we appreciate the fact that we can truly draw near to God, and think about that? And then are we looking forward in hope? Or are we looking back wanting our life before Christ?
Thank you for listening to the Honest Reflection Podcast. If you liked this episode, give it a like, a share, or even a comment to let us know how we're doing. We hope we've helped you think, reflect, and be honest about your relationship with God, and we can't wait to see you again next week.